So what we have here is a bunch of dueling conceptions of the way things should be. And then, of course, we also have the minimum wage. In this case, the minimum wage is something that the public safety workers say is completely unfair. But the whole purpose of it is, in fact, fairness. So I want to look at the minimum wage as a means of sort of getting into this issue of, if we're not going to allow the market to determine things, what does determine things? We should put up on the screen that this year there are a number of states considering minimum wage hikes. They are either in the process of it or the legislatures are looking to do it. And, you know, some quick history for our viewers. The minimum wage was instituted in 1938 by FDR. It's considered by many to be the sort of union for those without unions. It obviously establishes a floor for what you can legally pay people under a variety of circumstances. Different states actually have instituted different minimum wages. But as we see here, people are starting to say, well, maybe the minimum wage isn't fair. This has a big impact on our economy. We should put up what it is now versus what it used to be. We could put up a simple graph that shows that the minimum wage today is $7.25 federal minimum wage. But if it was adjusted for 1983, $6.90. This is inflation-adjusted dollars. But actually, if we went back to 1968, the minimum wage in inflation-adjusted dollars would be over $10 today. Now, we have high unemployment in this country. We obviously have an economy with all sorts of problems. But we have a president, White House, and Democrats in the House and Senate who seem to think that economic fairness should be the primary determining factor in a lot of major macroeconomic and, Scranton, microeconomic policies. So I want to ask you guys, is the minimum wage fair? Let's put aside the market for a second. Anybody? The minimum wage, is it fair?
What do you mean put aside the market? How do I answer that question? How do I do that?
Ask Will to put aside the market.
They don't. The minimum wage goes around the market. So can we allow perception, political perception, to determine for us? Because here's the thing. Let's put up what Barack Obama has had to say recently about the minimum wage.
We are not going to raise the minimum wage every 10 years. Ted Kennedy shouldn't have to be fighting this battle alone. We need a White House that says we are going to raise the minimum wage to keep pace with inflation every year, if that's what it takes, because if you work in this country, you should not be poor.
Now, before we make this into a partisan issue, Republicans are actually on the side sometimes of raising the minimum wage as well. We could look to none other than candidate Mitt Romney and what he's had to say on the minimum wage.
My view has been to allow the minimum wage to rise with the CPI or with another index so that it adjusts automatically over time.
So, Will, here we have it. We have both sides of the political aisle that are deciding, or at least saying at a given point in time, maybe for political expediency, that the minimum wage is a good thing. So, can it be a good thing? I want to throw this out to you guys because it seems like right now both sides of the aisle are even considering raising the minimum wage. Or is it a bad thing?
Yeah, it's a bad thing. I mean, I thought this debate
now
was
tell me why market-wise why it's a bad thing. Rip into it.
Because the higher the minimum wage, the higher the unemployment. You raise the floor for working people in this country. You raise the threshold for employment, that an employer must pay X amount. That inevitably pushes some people whose skills do not meet that wage out of the employment sector. That businesses aren't in the business of charity. So if you are only skilled at a certain level, but I'm required to pay you above that level, I'm not going to do that. That money doesn't come out of thin air. If my revenues can't justify it, then I'm not going to employ you.
And what do we find? Low-skilled workers are more likely to be unemployed during times of economic hardship, or actually just in general, but especially now. I mean, we see huge disparities between low-skilled and high-skilled workers.
Right.
But here's the problem with all of that. And it's basically whether or not you believe this graph that every person who studies economics learns, which is price, quantity, supply and demand of labor. Here is minimum wage, which is fixing the price. If it's above where equilibrium is, this is the amount of workers who would be unemployed, the people who would like to work versus the people who are hired under minimum wage. This was taught for decades in economics classes. I learned it myself. However, apparently, recent research says this is wrong, and that people are not like widgets, and that wages do not follow these types of efficiencies. Even Alan Blinder, professor at Princeton University, my alma mater, he says that his thinking has changed dramatically on the minimum wage and that the evidence appears to be against this simple-minded theory that a modest increase in the minimum wage causes substantial job loss. And there seems to be a growing consensus that raising the minimum wage raises people's household incomes without raising unemployment. So given that, does minimum wage look so bad anymore?
Well,
I'm going to take issue with that. I'm going to take issue with that. So, yes, there are studies that show various aspects to the effects of minimum wage. But, for instance, one of those studies that I'm sure Professor Blinder is talking about is a survey where they called employers on the phone and asked them if they planned to lay people off as a response to increasing minimum wages. Can you imagine what people on the phone told survey researchers? They said no. They're not planning to lay people off. But what people say on the phone and what they do in real life are often different. And so that was one of the major criticisms of that particular study done by some Princeton economists. And yeah, there's some others that have been done better that show that maybe it's not quite as, the relationship isn't quite as strong. But there's still plenty out there that shows that, in fact, there is a relationship, especially for low-skilled workers.